Hello, I'm Gwen Eiffel, and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra, where we pick up online where we left off on air. I'm joined by Ed O'Keefe of the Washington Post, who is a troublemaker, Michael Shearer of Time Magazine, who didn't get to finish his thought at the end of the program, maybe we'll let him, and Pete Williams of NBC News.
Who's a perfect gentleman.
A perfect gentleman. Ed had a good story in the paper today. Remember when the government shut down? Of course you do. Members of Congress said they were outraged and would give up whatever salary they would have earned. But did they? Ed actually went back and looked, and you found
that of about 240 lawmakers who were on our initial list, about 116 of them actually parted ways with some cash for about $490,000 and change. Oh. And it went primarily to charity. About 90,000 of it ended up going to back to the U.S. Treasury. I say I'm confusing the facts because we posted the story Thursday afternoon. I felt like Jerry Lewis throughout the rest of the afternoon because the tally kept climbing. Officers started returning my calls after ignoring them for weeks, and the tally jumped about $40,000 by the time we went to print. So this was based on a basic premise. We had sought this information in October. The reader response was overwhelming, but about 9 out of 10 readers said, "This is great, now show me the proof," because I don't believe that my lawmaker is actually going to do this. He's just telling me this. So the beginning of this year, I started following up.
So people start calling you back after the story posted and say, who had not given the money before, but now are?
Who had ignored my questions and either did or didn't and had an explanation as to why. And there were several who weren't on our original list that we hadn't found and said, well, hold on a second. If you're tallying, don't forget my boss who gave $8,000 to a food bank.
Oh, wow.
Was that it? 8,000?
Well,
is that the average amount that they gave that back? Because I noticed they seemed like Dianne Feinstein gave $10,000 and somebody else would give $5,000.
In general, it ranged from like $3,400 up to the $10,000. They all calculated it a little differently. Basically, they were taking their 16 days of pay, the net, and in many cases distributing it around their district. Ron Barber out in Arizona gave it to 48 different groups, each one getting about $150 because there were some concerns that if you give it to one, the House ethics guys would say that looks like a formal endorsement. Plus, they want to spread the wealth and score some political points. And
$150 doesn't really go very far. I hate to break it.
They appreciated getting the money.
How does this work out as a percentage of the national deficit?
I didn't get that big part.
What did the people who didn't give the money back say about why they didn't?
Well, dozens of members said that it was conditional. They would say, I will part ways with it if federal workers don't get repaid for time served. Because they were, dozens of them ended up getting their pay.
We also are federal workers, and we deserve to be repaid for the time served, even though we may have caused the shutdown.
Exactly.
Let me ask you a question, Michael. The cover of Time Magazine this week is Code Red. It's inside the healthcare debacle, Healthcare.gov debacle, and we finally find out what it took to fix it.
And we found out a number of things we didn't know before. One of them, when the president comes out after the shutdown to the Rose Garden and says, I'm really upset about this, we're getting to the bottom of it, he didn't know whether the website could be salvaged. They had brought in these engineers from Google, from his old campaign, and they were looking at things, and they hadn't given him an answer yet about whether they could even fix the code behind it. And really what happened was it was 3 or 4 very smart, very talented industry engineers who came into a space and they said they looked around and none of these contracting companies had taken charge or were taking any responsibility. And that was on the level of the suits. Underneath, they said there were actually some very able engineers working for these companies who just needed leadership. But because the companies were so skittish, they came in and took over and they said, look, we're not going to worry about blame. Several of them moved to the suburban D.C. area. And for almost a month, or in some cases more, worked nonstop to get the website up and going.
It feels like there were 2 things happening. There was the political argument where the president had no choice but to go into the Rose Garden and say, we're going to fix it, even if he didn't know that. And then there was the technological argument, which is, could this be fixed?
That's right. They didn't know. Well, what's amazing about this whole story is that this was not an issue the White House wasn't paying attention to. The White House, the Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, was saying in the weeks before the rollout, he was spending 2 hours a day focused only on the rollout. He's the Chief of Staff to the President. The President was having weekly meetings on this. They believed to their core that this was going to work. They didn't have any idea at the White House that the coding was so bad, that the actual website didn't work, and they didn't have anybody talking to them who could tell them that. And so when this all breaks down, what's amazing about it is they're totally in the dark.
Because they didn't tell them because they didn't know that it wasn't going to work, or they were afraid to tell them it wasn't going to work?
I don't think we know the answer to that. And this story, there are a number of people, what's been interesting about this whole story is that partly because it was such a crisis and they had to rebuild this thing on the fly. I mean, the plane was still flying as they tinkered with the engine here. They didn't want to throw any pilots out the window, and they still haven't thrown the pilots out the window. We don't have yet what I hope we do eventually, which is a real accountability report that says, here's what went wrong. But my guess is when we figure that out, it'll be what we've seen in other instances of IT contracting gone horribly awry, which is that contractors are contracted to oversee other contractors who have contracts. And a government official talks to one contractor, and that contractor says, oh, it's all working fine, I've got these other contractors. And then they all kind of fail, and then all the contractors point fingers at each other, and there's no government official who has the knowledge base to really know what's going on.
It's so sweet that you're so optimistic that we're going to get to the bottom of it. I just want you to know that 20 years after the Clinton administration, we're just now getting all of their documents released, telling us what was happening inside their healthcare fight. So I don't think I'm holding my breath on that one. Pete, you've got a fun story. At least I think it's a fun story, because here's the thing. We all know the Supreme Court is the high holy court, right? They don't allow cameras in. You have to be a very special person like yourself to actually see the court in action. But a video surfaced this week. I think we have a little bit of it. A video surfaced this week where someone actually managed to bring a camera inside the court.
You're going to see two pieces of video here. This was an argument earlier this year. So this was, I guess, a sort of a trial to see if it would work. This person is obviously way in the back of the courtroom. That's the justices up in front with the big columns. And then there was a second piece of video with this man from L.A. stood up at the end of oral argument during one of the patent cases this week toward the end and started criticizing the court's ruling on Citizens United that freed up a lot of corporate money, corporate and union money in campaigns. And that person was arrested. The person who spoke was arrested and charged with it's a crime to have a harangue in the Supreme Court, we found out this week. But
unless you're a justice.
But right. But the question is, how did the person get the cell phone in there twice? The court's saying it's reviewing its security procedures. Obviously, they're very concerned about it.
You usually have to give up your cell phone when you walk in the court?
You cannot take any electronic devices into the Supreme Court. So no cell phone, no camera, no tape recorder, nothing. And people are told this, and they're searched before they go in.
Is it a crime if you're caught violating that rule?
No, but it is a crime to stand up and talk during the Supreme Court.
And it's never happened in recent history that someone walked in and tried to do that?
Well,
it's never been posted on YouTube.
Exactly. As far as we know, this is the first time it's ever happened.
It's fascinating.
Obviously, the Supreme Court considers it a very serious matter.
This is why we can't have nice things, because people come in and ruin it for everybody.
Well, I mean, here's my question is, are the justices going to look at this now and say, oh, well, here's another argument against cameras in the courtroom. People will be using the oral argument as a forum for protest.
Oh, well, you know what? They didn't need another excuse because they have no intention.
Well, that's probably true, but it doesn't help.
Exactly. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the next Washington Week webcast.